He didn't shout it. He didn't dramatize it. He just said it calm, measured almost to normal. King Charles revealed that his cancer treatment would be reduced in 2026. And in one sentence, he flipped the mood around the entire monarchy. Because when a king finally gives a clear signal that things are improving, people don't just feel relief. They start asking what's been happening behind the scenes, what's still being protected, and what comes next. For months, the public had been stuck in a strange loop. He's receiving treatment. He's back to work. He's doing fine. He's scaling back. He's not. It was never chaotic, but it was never fully clear either. And when clarity is missing, the internet doesn't leave the space empty. It fills it. But that's what makes this moment different. This wasn't a vague palace line. It was the king, in his own voice, telling people there's been progress. And that's exactly why the update hit so hard. Because here's the part most people forget. Charles didn't grow into this job slowly the way other leaders do. He waited decades for it. Then, not long after becoming king, he's hit with a diagnosis that forces him to balance two lives at once, the public symbol, and the private person trying to get through treatment like anyone else. And the reason that December 2025 update got people emotional is simple. When someone like that finally says the intensity is easing, you feel the weight that must have been there before. But that still doesn't answer the question. Everyone's whispering, why has everything around him felt so fragile for so long? And to understand that, you have to look at what's being said, and what very intentionally is not. The palace confirmed in early 2024 that Charles had a form of cancer, and that he began regular treatment. That's the official baseline. But even now, the details have stayed private. The type wasn't publicly specified. The exact course wasn't fully mapped out for the public. And whether you agree with that privacy or not, it creates a predictable effect. People become detectives. Every schedule change becomes a sign. Every short appearance becomes a clue. Every photograph gets turned into a debate. That's why you'll see two realities happening at the same time. In one reality, Charles is keeping calm, doing engagements, meeting people, continuing constitutional duties, and presenting stability. In the other reality, the public is reading between every line. Because there are gaps, and gaps invite stories. And just when things seem to settle into a steady rhythm, there was a moment in 2025 that poured gasoline on everyone's anxiety. It happened on a day that started normally, until it didn't. In late March 2025, Buckingham Palace put out a statement saying the king experienced temporary side effects from treatment and spent a brief period under observation in the hospital. His afternoon engagements were postponed. The next day's schedule was adjusted as a precaution. The palace called it minor. Sources pushed, don't panic. But the public only heard one thing: hospital. That's the kind of word that instantly changes the temperature in the room. Not because it confirms a worst-case scenario, but because it reminds everyone that this is real. It's not a rumor cycle, not a tabloid game, not a palace-watching hobby. It's a human being who just happens to be the king dealing with a serious diagnosis in real time. And once that hospital note hit headlines, the internet did what it always does. It jumped straight to the most dramatic conclusion. That's when abdication whispers started popping up again. Not based on anything official, just the same familiar pattern. Uncertainty plus fear equals speculation. And multiple serious observers pushed back on the idea that Charles was looking to step away. The tone from credible reporting was more like this: the institution is built for continuity, and Charles has kept working when medically advised. But even if abdication wasn't actually on the table, the fact those whispers kept returning told you something else was going on. People weren't just worried about Charles. They were worried about what the monarchy looks like if multiple pieces move at once. And that's where the next layer comes in. Because while everyone focused on the king's health, the rest of the royal family's year was already loaded by the time Charles was navigating treatment. The monarchy had also watched the Princess of Wales step away from public life during her own cancer treatment. Catherine publicly shared that she completed chemotherapy in September 2024, and reporting later described her as being in remission as she gradually returned. That alone would be enough to shake the entire steady image the institution depends on. Because the monarchy doesn't just run on one person. It runs on the appearance that the system is always staffed, always stable, always moving. Then there was Queen Camilla's own health interruption in late 2024. when she pulled out of engagements due to a chest infection, it wasn't framed as some dramatic, mystery-just illness and rest like anyone else. But again, it added to the pile. When the public has already been on edge, even ordinary health updates start feeling like part of a bigger pattern. And here's the twist people didn't expect. Despite that entire stretch of uncertainty, despite treatment, despite family members stepping back, Charles ended up doing an enormous number of engagements in 2025, with reporting describing him as the hardest-working royal based on official tallies. That fact hits in two different ways depending on how you look at it. On one hand, it suggests resilience and recovery. On the other, it raises a quieter question. Was he pushing because he wanted to, or because the institution couldn't afford to look slow? And if you think health is the only thing that makes the monarchy feel unstable, there's another storyline that never fully leaves the headlines. The family fracture that keeps resurfacing no matter how many times people swear it's old news. In May 2025, Prince Harry publicly said he wanted reconciliation, but described a situation where he wasn't in communication with the king over the long-running dispute about security arrangements. That's the kind of quote that spreads fast because it feels personal, messy, and unresolved. People don't just hear reconciliation. They hear unfinished fight. They hear time is running, and that's why the public reaction tends to split. Some want the reunion story. Others assume it's impossible. And a third group believes the drama itself is the point. Then, later in 2025, Reuters reported that Harry and Charles met in-person tea at Clarence House, described as a possible first step toward easing the rift. Notice the wording there, possible first step, not a happy ending, not a reset. Just a moment that suggests things may be shifting behind the curtain, even if the public won't see the full picture. And while that father-son storyline pulls attention, another name keeps creating a different kind of problem for the monarchy, one that doesn't go away with a single meeting or a single statement. Prince Andrew has been a long-term reputational anchor on the entire institution. And by late 2025, reporting described Charles taking a more decisive approach, moves that pushed Andrew further out of royal standing, including formal steps around titles and styling, and a clear message. This is being contained. Reuters framed it as a survival mode, move on, attempt to insulate a monarchy already weakened by health challenges and public skepticism. And whether you see that as overdue or strategic, it signals something important. It signals that Charles isn't only fighting an illness, he's managing a system that has less room for error than it did even 10 years ago. Public patience is thinner, trust is more fragile, and every controversy that clings to the institution makes the "why do we still have this?" question louder. So when Charles finally says his treatment will be reduced next year, it doesn't land as a simple medical update. It lands as a pressure valve, releasing just a bit, on an institution that has been operating under stress from multiple directions at once. And now we're at the part everyone wants to interpret. Because as soon as you hear reduced treatment, two narratives start competing. Narrative one is hopeful. This is progress, a controlled shift, a sign that early diagnosis and ongoing care are working. A sign that the king expects to keep going and wants the public to stop bracing for a sudden cliffhanger headline. Narrative two is more suspicious. Why say it now? Why this phrasing? Why not be clearer? And if the treatment is reduced, does that mean the burden shifts harder onto other royals? Does it mean Charles is preparing the public psychologically for a different kind of schedule? Does it hint at something bigger? Here's what we actually know from reliable reporting. Charles began treatment after the 2024 announcement, returned to public-facing duties within that year, had a brief hospital observation in March 2025 due to side effects, and in December 2025 publicly said treatment would be reduced in 2026. That sequence doesn't scream sudden exit. It reads like a long, managed process, some setbacks, some forward movement, and an attempt to keep working responsibly while listening to doctors. But the reason people still feel uneasy is because so much of royal life is built on symbolism. If the king coughs, it's a headline. If a schedule changes, it's a theory. If a family rift softens, it becomes a secret deal. And the modern media machine doesn't just report events, it squeezes them for meaning. So even good news can feel ominous when it arrives after years of tension. And there's one more reason this update stuck. It wasn't just the content. It was the tone. And here's what makes the next chapter so tense. In public, the palace can say treatment reduced and move on. But behind the scenes, every single part of the royal machine still has to run like it's preparing for two futures at once. One future is the one everyone wants. Charles keeps improving. The calendar steadies. The family stops feeling like it's constantly bracing. The king looks more energetic at events, speaks more often. And the health watch culture slowly fades back into the background. That's the dream scenario. And it's exactly what that 2026 line invites people to imagine. But the other future is the one nobody wants to say out loud. Not because it's guaranteed, not because there's proof, just because the past 2 years trained the public to think this way. When a major institution goes through a stretch of uncertainty, people don't stop scanning for danger the moment they hear one good update. They keep scanning. They keep zooming in. They keep asking, okay, but what aren't we hearing? That's why even the best news can land with a strange aftertaste. It's relief mixed with suspicion. It's hope mixed with the memory of how quickly headlines can change. And it gets even more complicated when you remember what a monarch actually is. A king isn't just a public figure. He's a symbol of continuity. Every handshake, every ribbon cutting, every speech from a lectern is part of a larger message. The country is stable. The system is stable. The future is stable. So when Charles has to step back at all, it doesn't just affect his personal schedule. It changes the entire vibe of the institution. That's why the monarchy doesn't simply rest, it reorganizes. When Charles scaled back temporarily, everything had to be redistributed. That means more pressure on William and Catherine whenever they're able. More pressure on the working royals who don't normally carry the heaviest spotlight. And more pressure on a public relations machine that has to keep everything looking calm, even when people are exhausted behind the scenes. And that pressure creates a quiet paradox. The more the palace tries to look normal, the more the public becomes sensitive to tiny signs that it isn't a shorter appearance. Becomes, he looked tired, a lighter schedule. Becomes something is wrong. A missed event becomes, why did they cancel? And sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes it's literally just rest, or weather, or logistics. But after years of non-stop royal drama, the public doesn't interpret things neutrally anymore. It interprets them emotionally. That's why the reduced treatment update wasn't just medical, it was strategic. It was a way of telling the public, don't panic, don't spiral, don't fill the silence with worst-case fan fiction. There's forward movement here. But once you zoom out, you see the bigger tension. Even if Charles is improving, the monarchy is still navigating a different battlefield than it did in Elizabeth's era. Back then, you could disappear for a while and the public would wait. Now, disappearing creates a vacuum and vacuums get filled instantly. Not by careful reporting, but by the loudest theories, the most emotional claims, the most clickable fear. And here's the part that doesn't get said enough. Modern royals don't just live with pressure. They live with pressure that never turns off. The public isn't waiting for the next newspaper. The public is refreshing their feed. So when Charles speaks plainly, it feels like a release. It feels like a human voice cutting through a machine that normally communicates in polished statements. It's the closest thing the public gets to truth, because it's not filtered through 12 layers of palace language. And once people taste that, they want more. That's why the next few months matter. Not just for Charles's health, for the monarchy's relationship with the public. Because Charles accidentally did something powerful. By being open, he made the monarchy feel like a family again, not just an institution. And the moment people see a royal family as a family, the questions shift. It's no longer, is the monarchy stable? It becomes, is Charles okay? Is Camilla okay? Is William okay? Is Catherine okay? How are the kids handling it? And when the conversation becomes personal, it becomes stickier. It becomes emotional. It becomes addictive. That can be an advantage, until it isn't. Because the more personal the monarchy becomes, the more the public feels entitled to private details. And the more private details become the currency of attention. The harder it is for the royals to protect boundaries. That's the trap. If Charles shares too little, people speculate. If he shares too much, people demand more. And either way, every faction of the audience thinks their reaction is the reasonable one. So how does the palace respond? By trying to do what it always does. Keep the ship steady, keep the message controlled, keep the tone calm. But the last 2 years proved something. You can't fully control the narrative anymore. At best, you can steer it. At worst, it steers you. Which brings us to the moment people keep underestimating. The monarchy doesn't get to deal with one story at a time. While Charles is managing treatment and duty, the institution is also managing reputation. That's why the cleanup moves land so differently now. When headlines hit about further distancing controversial figures, it doesn't feel like random family politics. It feels like a monarchy tightening the bolts on the machine while it's still running. Because in a stable era, you can tolerate background noise. In a fragile era, every extra scandal is a risk. You can't afford dot, and that's why you can read the late 2025 decisions as a kind of message without the palace ever saying it. The message is, we're narrowing the focus. We're simplifying. We're protecting the center. Which again makes Charles's update even more important. The more the monarchy tries to consolidate around the king, the more the king's health becomes the center of gravity, and that leads to the most delicate topic in the entire royal conversation: succession anxiety. Most people will deny they think about it, but they do. They think about it every time Charles looks tired, every time William's workload spikes, every time Catherine goes quiet for a stretch. It's not cruelty, it's pattern recognition. The monarchy is built on the idea that the next person is ready. So when the public senses stress in the system, the first question they ask is, are they ready? And here's the uncomfortable truth. Readiness isn't a switch you flip. It's something you perform. William has been performing readiness for years. He speaks carefully. He moves carefully. He keeps the tone measured. And that's why any hint of personal strain becomes headline fuel, because the entire public relationship is built on stability. That's also why family drama never fully dies. The Harry storyline isn't just about conflict. It's about image. It's about unity. It's about whether the monarchy looks like it, can even keep its own house in order. And when you add reported private meetings and reconciliation language into the mix, it creates a new kind of tension, hope with a sharp edge. Because if reconciliation is real, the public wants it. If it's not real, the public feels played. If it happens quietly, people ask why it's hidden. If it happens publicly, people accuse it of being staged. Again, the trap. So what does reduced treatment in 2026 really mean in this environment? It means the monarchy is trying to move into its next phase without triggering chaos. It's the king quietly saying, I'm still here. I'm planning ahead. This isn't a countdown. Stop writing my ending for me. But the reason it still feels heavy is because you can hear what's underneath it. These years have cost something. Even if he's improving, the emotional toll doesn't just vanish. Families don't go through intense health scares and come out untouched. They come out changed, and the monarchy, more than most families, it doesn't get to change in private. Every change is a headline. So here's what to watch next, not as a rumor hunt, but as a reality check. Watch whether Charles's public schedule gradually becomes more ambitious in early 2026, or whether it stays carefully measured. Watch whether Camilla returns to a fuller rhythm, or whether her role stays scaled back. Watch whether William and Catherine's appearances feel like a coordinated, steady front, or like a cautious return at their own pace. And most importantly, watch whether the palace keeps letting Charles speak like a person, because that might be the real shift. The old monarchy relied on distance. The new monarchy might survive on connection, but connection comes with a price. You can't unhumanize yourself once the public has seen you human. And that's why this update didn't just break hearts in a sad way. It broke hearts in a complicated way. People felt protective. People felt worried. People felt the weight of time. They heard a man who waited his whole life to be king, and now has to fight to simply stay in the role he finally got. So when Charles says reduced treatment, it's not just relief. It's the sound of a man trying to get part of his life back. And if he succeeds, it could mark the start of a quieter era. But if the last few years taught us anything, it's that the monarchy doesn't get quiet easily, because even when the palace goes silent, the world doesn't. And that's the real reason people